entitlement, deception, and a collapse no one saw coming. Witness how one man's ego met the unforgiving hand of justice. The courtroom buzzed like a storm beneath the surface. Low murmurs, nervous shifting, a crowd barely containing its anticipation. The gallery was jammed with curious onlookers, elbows brushing, whispers flying from row to row, each more outrageous than the last. Then he appeared, broad-chested, draped in an expensive charcoal suit that screamed vanity. He moved like a man used to applause, not accountability. His hair, slicked to perfection, glinted beneath the white courtroom lights. And his smirk? The kind you'd expect from a man who still thought he was at a gala, not on trial. Brandon Steele. A name burned into every news cycle for nearly a month. Accused of swindling millions from working families on the edge of collapse, he carried himself like the room owed him something. As if this was all a misunderstanding, a PR hiccup, not a reckoning. But the real shift in the room came not with Brandon's entrance but with hers. When Judge Evelyn Harper entered, everything changed. Clad in her robe, she didn't need to bark orders or scan the crowd to claim authority. It radiated from her, a silent demand for order, for truth. Her reputation alone silenced even the boldest. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Evelyn Harper," the bailiff called. And everyone did except one. Brandon sat back, legs relaxed, flipping casually through a notepad as though he were waiting for a coffee, not a verdict. His attorney leaned in, whispering something urgent. But Brandon brushed him away with the arrogance of a man convinced he was untouchable. Judge Harper stood still at her bench, her eyes locked on Brandon like a storm waiting to break. Her face was unreadable, stone calm, but the silence she allowed to stretch out felt like a wire pulled tighter and tighter with every second. Whispers stirred like wind through dry leaves. People shifted in their seats, glancing at one another with disbelief etched across their faces. Who did this guy think he was? Yet Brandon sat there, perfectly still, oozing smug defiance. His eyes were a challenge. His posture an insult. He wasn't just ignoring authority, he was mocking it. "You may be seated," Judge Harper finally said, her tone measured, deliberate. No scolding. No drama. But the message was clear. The mood in the courtroom changed in an instant. It wasn't just tense, it was electrified. The air felt heavier. The room braced for what was coming. Because this was just the opening move. Brandon Steele was about to find out, in the most public way possible, that wealth, arrogance, and self-importance don't hold up in the face of truth. Brandon wasn't your average millionaire. He lived a life most people could only imagine. Super yachts docked in Monaco, sprawling homes in Malibu and Manhattan, jets with custom interiors, and soirees packed with celebrities and politicians. But beneath the surface of his glittering empire, a rotten foundation lay hidden. Grayson Investments, once praised as the gold standard in finance, was a house of cards built on lies. He didn't just make money, he took it. From people who trusted him. People who had scraped and saved. People who believed in the dream he sold. Their savings gone. Retirement funds wiped clean. College accounts emptied. He had drained the hopes of hundreds, maybe thousands, and turned their futures into fuel for his luxury. But now, all that was beginning to unravel. The aftermath was brutal. Families were uprooted, their homes gone overnight. Mothers and fathers faced empty cupboards, unsure how they'd feed their kids. Elderly couples who had planned peaceful retirements now stared down the barrel of poverty, their final years stained by uncertainty. The damage stretched like a shadow, long and cold. But to Brandon, it was all just numbers on a ledger. Nothing personal. Just another deal. When the authorities finally caught up to him, the scale of the deception was almost too big to believe. Doctored bank statements, forged paperwork, whistleblowers from inside the company. The truth painted a grim picture. And yet, Brandon still acted untouchable. "I've got the best lawyers in the country," he told a swarm of reporters from his Malibu driveway, sunglasses on, smile intact. "This'll pass. It always does." And for a moment it looked like he might be right. His legal team threw every trick in the book, delaying tactics, counter-accusations, PR spins. They portrayed him as a bold visionary misunderstood by the system. A scapegoat, not a villain. But facts don't vanish. And grief doesn't forget. No courtroom spin could bury the paper trail, or the stories of those he'd crushed. When the trial finally kicked off in San Francisco, the courtroom was standing room only. People didn't come for drama. They came for justice. Or at least some kind of reckoning. Tasha Reynolds sat in the front row. A widowed mother of 3. She'd poured her life savings into Grayson's promises and lost her house. Her youngest daughter had to quit college. Next to her sat Henry Dalton, a retired firefighter who'd saved every penny for a quiet retirement. Now he lived in his brother's guest room. They weren't just names in a file. They were voices. And one by one they shared their pain, raw, real, and unforgettable. During the trial, Tasha's voice cracked as she spoke. She recalled the moment she realized the mortgage wouldn't be paid. "I begged them," she said, tears falling freely. "Please don't take our home." But it didn't matter. "My kids, they slept in our car for 2 weeks. Do you know what that does to a mother?" Henry's testimony followed. Just as raw. "I spent 35 years running into fires to save lives," he said, his voice low and tense. "And this man, he torched my future like it meant nothing." But while their pain filled the courtroom, Brandon Steele barely looked up. He leaned back, checked his phone, whispered jokes to his attorney. Unmoved. Detached. To him, these were just speeches. Background noise. The outcome? Already in his pocket. The media had a field day. Headlines blasted his smug behavior, his coldness, his utter disrespect for the people he'd harmed. Public outrage grew louder by the hour. But Brandon? He shrugged it off. "Outrage doesn't cash checks," he once told a reporter. At a press conference, his lawyer tried to shift the narrative. "Mr. Grayson regrets any unintended hardship," he claimed. "But we're confident the facts will speak for themselves." But here's the truth: Brandon never planned to own up. He was counting on the same system that had always shielded him. What he didn't see coming was Judge Evelyn Harper. She wasn't someone you could charm, outspend, or intimidate. And this time the game was different. Outside, the courthouse was swarmed by media trucks. Inside, the world watched, waiting for justice to do something it rarely does to men like Brandon Steele. Hold them accountable. As the trial dragged into its 3rd day, the pressure in the courtroom thickened. Witness after witness stepped up, each one adding weight to the growing case against Brandon Steele. But it wasn't just their words that stole the air from the room, it was Brandon's reaction to it all. That morning, the prosecution dropped a bombshell, a chain of internal emails that left no doubt about Grayson's guilt. In them, he gave direct orders to manipulate financial records and mislead investors. Gasps rippled through the room as the prosecutor read aloud, "Fix the numbers. We need these suckers to sign without questions." The words hit like a slap. Tasha Reynolds sat frozen in the front row, eyes wide with disbelief. Henry Dalton's jaw tightened, his fists clenched. "And Brandon?" He grinned. The prosecutor turned, fire in her eyes. "Mr. Grayson, do you recognize this email?" His lawyer sprang into action. "Objection, this matter was settled during pre-trial," he insisted. Judge Harper lifted her hand, calm but unyielding. "Overruled. The defendant will respond." Brandon leaned toward the mic, his voice laced with arrogance. "I recognize it. But let's not twist it, it's just business lingo. Something you clearly don't get." The room buzzed with disbelief. Whispers swelled. The judge's gavel slammed down, silencing the chaos. "Order." Judge Harper's voice cut through the murmur like a blade. She fixed her gaze on Brandon. "Mr. Grayson, this is a court of law. Not your boardroom. Watch your tone." But Brandon didn't flinch. In fact, the smirk returned. To him, this wasn't a trial, it was theater. And he thought he still owned the stage. As the trial pressed on, so did Brandon's smug behavior. He scoffed at witnesses mid-sentence, rolled his eyes like a bored teenager, and kept whispering sarcastic comments to his attorney during the most crucial parts. To the courtroom, it was a circus. To him, it was just another performance. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Tasha Reynolds took the stand. She approached slowly, clutching a worn piece of paper. Her hands trembling with the weight of what she was about to say. Her voice cracked at first, but every word she spoke echoed with raw pain. "I believed in him," she said, locking eyes with Brandon. "I gave him everything. He didn't just steal money, he stole our future." Brandon didn't flinch. Didn't even glance at her. He lounged back in his chair, eyes glued to his phone, scrolling like he was checking the weather forecast. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, pointing across the courtroom. "The defendant is clearly ignoring the witness." Every head turned toward Judge Harper. Her face was calm, but her eyes narrowed like a storm brewing behind glass. "Mr. Grayson," she said evenly, "put the phone down." Brandon looked up slowly, expression unreadable. "I'm just checking something important," he said, lifting the device for all to see. Her voice dropped into steel. "I said now." A beat passed, tense, defiant, before Brandon finally, and with exaggerated reluctance, lowered the phone. The damage, however, had already sunk in. Tasha resumed her testimony, but her voice shook, not from nerves this time, but from disbelief at how little he seemed to care. By the time she stepped down, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Except Brandon's. The prosecution wrapped up its case a week later, strong, detailed, and damning. Now it was the defense's turn. Brandon's attorney went all in, throwing dirt at witnesses, spinning half-truths into full-blown distractions, and trying to paint Brandon as the scapegoat of a legal witch hunt. But the truth had already punched too many holes in their story. No clever phrasing or courtroom theatrics could patch what was broken. Judge Evelyn Harper sat silent through most of it, but her stillness wasn't passive, it was powerful. Her gaze, calm but cutting, reminded everyone that justice was watching. And though she rarely raised her voice, it was obvious. Her patience with Brandon's smug behavior was wearing razor thin. Then came the final day. The tension in the courtroom could have snapped steel. Reporters lined the back wall, pens twitching, cameras fixed on the front. Every seat was taken, many by the victims, their faces a cocktail of anxiety, anger, and fragile hope. And at the center of it all was Brandon Steele, lounging at the defense table like a man waiting for a dinner reservation. He even smirked for the cameras as if the whole thing was some twisted game he was still winning. But that smile began to fade the moment Judge Harper spoke. "Mr. Grayson," she said, each word clear, deliberate, and without pause, "this court finds you guilty on all charges, fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." You could hear the oxygen leave the room. "The evidence against you is not just convincing," she continued. "It is crushing. The stories shared by your victims. They show the truth. You deceived good people. You robbed them of their security, their futures, and in many cases, their dignity, all to feed your own greed." Brandon didn't flinch. He leaned back, arms crossed, face blank. But his silence screamed louder than any outburst. Judge Harper's tone sharpened. "And throughout this trial you've shown no remorse. No humility. You mocked your victims. You defied the rules of this courtroom. And you carried yourself not like a man facing justice, but like one convinced he was above it." A ripple ran through the courtroom, soft gasps, hushed whispers. Tasha Reynolds, seated in the front row, gripped her hands so tightly her fingers trembled, her knuckles pale. Judge Harper's voice dropped a degree, colder now, carved from steel. "Mr. Grayson, justice doesn't bend for status or wealth. It answers to truth. And today it answers to yours." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sound of a page turning seemed too loud. Brandon's confident smirk twitched, then faded. He sat up straighter, sensing the ground shift beneath him. "Therefore," Judge Harper said, her tone unshaken, "I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison, no chance of parole." The room erupted. Audible gasps. "Suck." Brandon's face went slack, his skin pale as chalk. 25 years. He had braced for a slap on the wrist. A short stint in luxury. But this was real. Judge Harper wasn't done. "In addition," she said, "your assets will be seized and liquidated immediately. Every cent will go toward repaying the lives you shattered. The families you left in ruin." The courtroom buzzed with disbelief. Tasha covered her mouth, tears pouring freely. This wasn't just a sentence. It was justice finally. Henry Dalton sat frozen, eyes wide, struggling to believe what he'd just witnessed. Brandon shot to his feet, his face flushed with rage. "You can't do this," he barked, voice bouncing off the courtroom walls. "I'm Brandon Steele. I'm not some street thug you can just toss in a cage." Judge Harper's gavel hit like thunder. "Mr. Grayson, sit down." But he wouldn't. "Not yet. This is a farce. I'll have this overturned. I'll end your career." His voice cracked as the bailiff stepped forward, ready to act. Judge Harper didn't flinch. Her tone sliced through the chaos. "This is my courtroom," she said, eyes locked on him. "And in here, respect is not optional. Bailiffs, remove him." As Brandon was dragged away, still yelling, his voice faded with every step, until only the rustle of movement and a deep silence remained. Then came the sound that hadn't echoed in that room in years: applause. Honest, cathartic, deserved. Judge Harper turned to the crowd, her expression softening ever so slightly. "Justice," she said, "has spoken. Let this stand as proof. Power does not place you above the law." But as the doors swung open, reporters scrambled for headlines, and the crowd filtered out, one question hung in the air. Would a sentence like this ever reach a man like Brandon Steele? The courtroom had mostly cleared, just a handful of reporters and weary victims slowly gathering what was left of their day. The buzz of the verdict still lingered, but for those who lived the fallout of Brandon Steele's lies, the feelings ran deeper than celebration. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Tasha Reynolds clutched her worn-out purse, fingers tense around the strap. A journalist stepped forward with a mic. "How do you feel after everything that's happened today?" Tasha paused. "There's relief," she admitted quietly. "But justice doesn't undo what we lost. My kids and I were still putting the pieces back together. But now, at least we can breathe again." Not far from her, Henry Dalton leaned in close to a friend, his voice low but certain. "This isn't just about how many years the guy got," he said. "It's about what it means. People like him always believe they're above consequence. Today proved they're not." Meanwhile, high above the noise and cameras, Judge Evelyn Harper sat alone in her chambers, eyes fixed on the crowd below. She felt no rush of pride, no craving for applause. Just purpose. This was never about ego. It was about balance, and today, even against wealth and power, the scales had held their ground. Brandon Steele's name would linger in headlines for a while longer. But for the people he'd hurt, the final chapter was being written. The compensation would help some rebuild, but the emotional wreckage, those wounds would take time. In the weeks that followed, his story ignited something nationwide. People started talking about power, about fairness, about what it really means to be held accountable. Strangers shared their own experiences of betrayal and injustice, many finding courage in the outcome of the trial. But perhaps the most unforgettable moment came in the form of a letter, written by Tasha Reynolds' youngest daughter, Lily. Published in a small local paper, it read, "Thank you for standing up for my mom. Thank you for proving that someone like Brandon Steele doesn't get to crush people like us and walk away. You didn't just give us justice. You gave us hope." This wasn't just another legal case. It was proof that truth can rise, that character still matters, and that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, is beyond the reach of justice. So now that you've heard this story, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what does accountability truly look like in your world? In your own life, in your own choices, how are you making fairness and justice more than just ideas, but real, tangible actions? Because here's the truth. Justice isn't just a courtroom verdict. It's not just the job of judges and lawyers. It's something we all have a hand in, something we must protect, stand for, and live out every single day. If this story moved you, drop a comment and let us know. Which moment hit you the hardest? And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss another story that might touch your heart just as deeply. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one.